One. Okay, the purpose of tonight's study session is to give the Planning Commission the opportunity to hear information and ask questions related to the upcoming Planning Code Chapter 16 amendments. This information is preliminary in nature and often complex and detailed in content. Professional or contract staff is sometimes scheduled for presentations. To make the most of the short time we are given for these meetings and to keep professional or contract staff costs to a minimum, the Planning Commission has a policy that public audience comment will not be taken at study session meetings. This is appropriate under Oregon Public Meetings Law. Instead, we invite public comment at all of the Planning Commission regular meetings under either of the two opportunities dedicated on each agenda for public comment. In addition, we invite the public to contact city staff with comments or concerns. Although this is a public meeting, the Planning Commission cannot make any formal decision in a study session. Next steps actions are often determined for deliberation and discussion at future Planning Commission regular meetings. So Brian, why don't you lead us off?
Yeah, so we've got Dave Epling here that's been our primary code amender to lead the discussion tonight. In the packet, I think Lainey explained when she sent everything out, is we've highlighted in yellow the areas that you had some question about with our previous meetings or directed us to make some changes. And then in the teal blue color, those are items that you've never seen before that we've been working on since the last meeting we've had. And we were able to have time to add those. And then we do have one additional item that Dave will talk about that we just completed today that we're going to introduce tonight because we think it's very important. We were going to leave it for a future code amendment package that I think Dave's going to get started on while he's still here. But we thought it was important enough that we moved it ahead and are going to introduce that tonight too. But Dave's got the entire code, I think, in front of him tonight. If there was something else that you thought of from the previous meetings that you want to discuss, you can. But we were trying to focus you on those things that you wanted to see again and haven't seen. Okay. So we could keep moving along. Our hope is that this would be our final informal meeting for this proposed code package change. There's lots of other code changes we have written down that we'd like to make. And so they're going to have to be in the next package because at some point we have to just stop and start a new one so that what we present as a public hearing item isn't constantly changing. So our intent is to try to make this the last meeting if possible so that then we can give our notice to the state and hold our first evidentiary public hearing meeting, which we try to schedule for June 10th. And it has to be that far out to get the 35-day notice. And that might give us an opportunity to go to a July 3rd city council meeting with the things that we've been working on. So it's up to you though. See what you think tonight after we have this review session. So I'll let Dave get started.
Okay, good evening, Commissioners. There might be some comprehensive plan amendments attached to this too, which brings us to the first item on Title 16. There's two code chapters that we want to repeal. One would be an agricultural zone, and the other one that we talked about it before, but it wasn't listed in here as being removed. The other one's a CC. Convenience commercial zone, and we'd like to just add that to that list of repealed code chapters in order to do, and the reason why we want to do this is because there is no CC zone on the comp plan map, or any agricultural zone on the comp plan map, or the zone map. There's no CC zone on the zone map. However, they are mentioned and discussed in the comprehensive plan. So we may have to go in there and reword and remove some language in order to keep it consistent with the zone code. And the next item is the accessory dwelling unit. We noticed that there wasn't really a definition for that. And so we added that in the definition section. And that is on page 4 under 1604040, accessory dwelling units. And basically it just says accessory dwelling units is an interior attached or detached residential structure that is used in connection with or that is accessory to a single-family dwelling. That's just what it is. And I believe I got that definition from the ORS, or the new accessory dwelling.
I might mention this definition along with the regulations that I think in the first meeting we reviewed really quickly, is our state mandated that we change our current code so that all accessory dwelling units as defined here are allowed outright in all residential zones. And they give you some leeway on what standards you can have that apply to those. We ended up mostly just keeping what we had.
Right, and I think we tweaked it a little bit with one of the suggestions that they had. But we discussed that in I think our first meeting or second meeting, and went over that. The other item is the, moving on to 1604, page 9, 1604.190. We went ahead and corrected this and put the manufactured home language back in that dwelling single family. It was actually in this previous one, and we had removed it, and we just put it back in. It was in the previous 190, so we simply just put that back in there. It's sort of unnecessary, but when you look at it, it just says that it has to be a legal manufactured home structure before you can consider it a single-family dwelling. It has to meet all the provisions of placing a manufactured home. And we added the word townhouse, common wall for dwellings, means single-family attached common wall dwellings. We just added those words. And then on the next page, on 1604.230, the height of a building, measuring the height of a building. We took out the word average height of the highest gable or pitch and just made it the highest point. It's the highest point of the pitch or of a pitch or hip roof. Simply measure to the highest point. That simplified it, and it makes it much easier to implement. Going that way. And jumping to the next change. We discussed this previously, but we made some corrections to this, so we put it back in. We were having problems with arbors attached to the top of fences. They ended up in zoning violations and complaints to our zoning officer because you add an arbor to, you're allowed a 6-foot fence. Well, in order to get around that, people would put an arbor on top of the fence, and they didn't follow the rules for vegetation and so on. They'd make it solid or part of the fence. So it was ending up being a lot of problems to enforce that. And so we decided to remove that and give it its own section, which we did over here. We simply put it under 1608.115 under arbors, its own section. And basically we made it a standalone structure. you can go ahead and build an arbor. Some people love grape arbors or arbors in their home for shade in their yard. We did them in order to avoid trouble with the neighbors. We set a 5-foot setback from the property line. You can build this independent structure, use it for an arbor, set underneath it, grow grapes, whatever you want to do, but you can't allow it to become a fence between you and your neighbor, which led to a lot of problems.
Excuse me.
And,
So what you're saying is, people had the fence, and then whatever the height, the allowable height of the fence,
6 foot.
but then on top of that,
They would put an
they
arbor.
would build, they would add another
Latex,
2 or 3 or
lattice.
feet of lattice work, okay.
Yeah, and stuff like that. So it was a problem.
Or they'll even build it parallel against the existing fence, a separate arbor fence.
Yeah, which
Which-
is allowed at 8 foot. So
But
they get around
they
the
would
height of the
grow
fence.
plants on the arbor, but yet they're put at the same place where the fence was, or side by side with it.
They would use it to get around the 6 foot height on the fence, the maximum height.
Right.
They could go up higher with an arbor.
Okay.
So, and it's there to provide shade, recreational space, and I like this one, aesthetic amenity. But also, we sort of skipped over the hazardous materials, which was another problem as far as implementing this code. People would want to put barbed wire in a residential area. They don't like the neighbors that want to put a couple strips of barbed wire on top of the fence. It happens. And
Next thing you know, there'll be concertina wire and turrets.
Yeah, I was going to ask about guard towers. Are those out too?
Yeah.
yeah, it happens.
What part of
We have-
town is this in?
So what we did, we said, we just simply said the use of hazardous materials, fences and walls shall not be construction of or contain any material which will do bodily harm, such as electric, barbed wire, razor wire, broken glass, and spikes. And I couldn't think of anything else. But other hazardous, dangerous material. So we did accept 2 things. One of them, if you have an agricultural operation going on, and it's a non-conforming use, and just continued, you can use electrical fences and barbed wires for your animals. So we put that as an exception. And also, we accepted out the commercial and industrial zones, which barbed wire is a legitimate use. And a lot of businesses in the industrial zone, they need to protect a lot of expensive equipment. And so we felt they already do that, as a matter of fact, and it wasn't really permitted, but we just went ahead and approved those. And there is some provisions that restrict that somewhat. The barbed wire shall not extend over the street, sidewalk, or alley, or roadway, and the attached wire shall be placed at least 6 inches above the top of the fence. In other words, there's still a pedestrian safety feature of what they can do there. So we felt that was an adequate way to handle that. Now, the next one, we go to 1610. And that's a simple change. There was a category for streets. Well, actually, there was nothing in here about streets. It's about street trees. So we changed the title under the section to street trees instead of streets. And then we put a section, I believe, for street trees that we discussed previously. It's in the section here. And yeah, but also in this chapter, we made a new change. On page 13, chapter 1610, we added a provision for circular type driveways. It was already in there, but what we did was we changed this. And there was a minimum distance between two driveways before on one single-family residential lot. So you're on one lot, and you have two driveways, and you had to have a minimum distance between those two driveways, even though you have a large lot. So we made it for a circular driveway. So if you're going to have two driveways on your property, we wanted a circular driveway, 30 feet apart. And one of the reasons we did this is Public Works had problems with people having more than one driveway on the same lot. It causes problems, safety problems with Public Works.
How so?
What was their main reason?
Well, we've just always, they've been trying to enforce the fewer driveways, the better on all streets, because it reduces conflicts. And so they were trying to say each residential lot should only have one driveway. When I came, it was pulling teeth, but I allowed, if you had two street frontages, the possibility of a driveway on each street frontage for a residential.
So for like a corner lot?
Right.
Okay.
We actually had a home that was proposed in the Northwood subdivision that had a two-car garage on one street, and then on the other street, it had another single-car garage. So obviously, they wanted two driveways. And apparently, that was the first time that had ever been allowed for many, many years when I first arrived here.
There's a lot of history with that, yeah.
Yeah, so, but we've always had in our code a provision for a circle driveway, which would mean usually a one-way driveway, but not necessarily. You could come in one way or the other way, depending on what you did, but you could circle around. You usually, whichever way you come in, you usually keep going around and going out the other. But I think we were just trying to write it in a little bit clearer that
Yeah, there was a lot of
still going to
confusion
be allowed.
about it. Public Works would say one thing, and then we would say, well, you can have a circular driveway. So we're going back and forth about it a lot. And this sort of clarifies that.
Yeah, actually, they don't use the word circular in our current code. Did we put that in the?
Well, we put that one in
Yeah.
this one, yeah, circular
Yeah.
driveway. The next change would be at 1612. And we're back to the CC zone, and this section is classification of zones. And so once again, we had to point that out, that we're going to remove that from this chapter, which is only one page. The next one is, yeah, we added just a minor change on page 8 of 1616. And we've had this come up quite a few times. Developers want to put a chimney or a fireplace or a stove or a fireplace out into the setback area. And there was really nothing in the code to allow them to do that. It says mechanical units or heating and cooling in residential units. Nothing said about a chimney or fireplace. And we decided to add this because there's really no significance to someone putting a 2-foot fireplace out into the 7-foot setback. If you're going to put a mechanical unit out there anyway, why not a fireplace, chimney? Now, the one below that one, in number 3, we added porches. This has been in there a long time, and we just reworded it before. And since we met last, we added porches in there. And we decided that that wasn't a good idea. We'd like to remove porches because porches have their own setback as part of the house. Whereas a covered patio on the south side or the west side of the yard, it makes sense because if you want to cover your patio out there. But to run a porch into up to a 5-foot setback seems a little bit extreme.
So you're not going to have porches,
We're
even
not
though you're
going to
showing
have
it
porch
here.
under this, just covered patios. So we'd like to remove that one. The next is another new addition. It's under 1618, page 1.
Can I go back to that? And it's maybe a stupid question. Can you differentiate for me the definition between a porch and a covered patio?
Well, a covered patio is really more of a temporary thing. It can come and go. They can have a covered patio or uncovered patio, but a porch is usually part of the structure of the house. It could run across the whole width of the house.
So is there something in the code that defines what a covered patio is? I get that you're saying it's a temporary thing, but I guess I'm just trying to figure out, could I make an argument that they're the same thing if I wanted to do that, is what I'm asking.
Structurally, it would be different, I believe.
Okay,
Porch would usually continue out at the elevation of at the floor elevation of the house.
right.
Yeah.
Patio would probably be a
Step down on a concrete.
step down.
Right.
And
I
porch
think-
would usually can be completely separate, but can also be attached structurally.
Yeah. So I think building permits would look at it as a structural thing more than a covered.
I can't remember the discussion that we had last time. Can you tell me what the rationale was of taking the porch off?
Well, we didn't talk about it.
Oh, we didn't. Oh, I'm sorry then. Okay,
This
never
was
mind.
sort of our discussion
Okay.
since we talked to you last.
Oh, okay.
And the next one, 16.18, page 1. What we did is we made, this is an R1.5 zone. And it previously listed single-family dwellings having common wall construction as a conditional use. We moved that up to a permitted use as a single-family dwelling. And we added some provisions that made sense. Underneath that single-family townhouse dwelling, we said the townhouse construction is limited to a maximum grouping of 3 units. And if more than one group of dwellings is developed, then a 5-foot distance shall be maintained between the adjacent group of dwellings. In other words, an R1.5 zone has more density, so we're willing, but we don't want them to stretch 6, but 3 sounded reasonable.
3,
Yeah, 3 townhouses. And
but
if they-
you're going to 6. That's
Yes.
6 townhouses, and then that's the maximum length of a
by
continuous structure.
definition, yeah.
And that's pretty standard in my experience. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what, but my question, and before I ask my question, I want to make sure I understand what we're doing here. You're just looking for comments from us, right? And maybe head nods,
Sure.
but we're not approving or anything
Right.
here tonight. You're just hearing us what we think. Your 5-foot break between a couple of 120-foot long buildings is nothing, in my view. I think aesthetically, it doesn't do what you want it to do unless you've got some pretty good architectural standards in with those townhouses to create site separation between each individual unit. In other words, you've got this kind of thing going on, frontal. But all I'm saying is, you've got 120 and 120, and you're putting a 5-foot gap between.
Well,
My comment is it's not enough.
it's not enough. Well, the reason why we suggested that is because, for a safety reason, more so than aesthetic reasons, you can run a fire hose in between 6 units. You got 6 units and 6 units, and there's a fire behind those units. You can run them between, you have a chance to go between the units.
You could do that
fire
with
hose.
3-foot too.
Yeah, pardon?
You could do that with a 3-foot gap too, between the
Okay,
buildings.
yeah.
I'm not talking about safety, I'm talking about 40 years' worth of aesthetics sitting on a street and looking at a couple of buildings bumped up against each other, and
You know, that's
I
just,
just,
that's
it's a
suggestion.
bad idea to have that close a separation.
What would you suggest?
10 or 15.
10? Sure.
In this particular zone, Did we put that standard
See,
in the
the-
R2 zone?
Right, the 6 units, we allowed for the R2 zone. Here, we're doing 3 units in R1.5.
There's no more than 3 units in this zone allowed.
Okay, so
So we're doing 3 units in this zone. And then we, for safety, we put a 5-foot, and then if you want to run.
I'll leave my comment as standing, given that it's a lower density. It's a lower density unit. I still think you need more separation between structures. If you're trying to maintain a flavor of medium density there, I think 5 foot, it's still going to look like.
We can make it 10.
So I'll leave,
But
I'm not expecting
if
you
you're all in
to
agreement, we'll
change
make it 10.
everything I say, but if you're looking for comments, it's too tight.
I think I agree with that,
Okay,
yeah.
I don't see a problem with that.
well, fine, yeah. All in agreement, that's fine. That's just, we just threw that out there as a suggestion.
And if we get to, if and when we get to higher density, the
R2
same
would be
comment
the
would
same
apply.
thing?
Yeah.
Okay. And, well,
For me.
in the R2, we're allowing 6 instead of 3.
So let me just clarify a little bit. We had some of the research that was done by Regina that's out in the audience here. She's very concerned about not having fire emergency access to middle units.
Yeah.
And so this was an idea of accommodation to separate a structure that has 3 units from another structure with 3 units, so
And it's a-
that they wouldn't have to go through the middle unit to get to the back.
I think it's a great idea, and I'm not questioning it from a safety standpoint at all. I guess I've had to approach this question in the past when it comes to going through the permitting process or variance processes or continual use processes where the neighbors show up to talk about the big, long buildings that are going to be
Exactly.
occupying their street and what the visual and psychological effect is that's going to be on the neighborhood. For example, if it's across the street from you and you have like R1 on one side or R1.5 and it's R2 on the other, and all of a sudden you've got 250 feet of building with one 5-foot gap. And depending upon how well it's designed, usually that involves money. It could be something
We
we're
did
pretty
limit it.
unhappy about.
We did limit to 120 feet.
Yeah.
But,
Well-
and in the R2 zone, when we'll get there, but we allowed 6 units instead of 3. And then we made them do a gap in between. Instead of allowing them to run 12 units in one long row of houses, they'll have to break those up, 6 and 6, if they can find a lot large enough in an R2 zone here.
Well, that's where you'll build what you can accommodate. And I think, lot sizes, I think it's going to come up again in some of these other
Sure.
discussions we're going to have.
The overall lot, yeah.
So one of the problems that this doesn't solve is the fact that it's very likely, since townhomes are individually owned, that homeowners will want to erect a fence in their backyard. And so you'll still have fencing in the backyards where you have a middle unit that you physically can't get to without hopping over the neighbor's fences. And so
Yes.
even if you can pull a fire hose around the gap between the buildings, you can get closer, but you still can't get in that rear middle unit's yard that has the barbecue that's on fire.
And I've had one of those, a barbecue that turned
Yeah.
into a skyrocket, propane powered.
Yep.
But, that speaks to your other suggestion, I think, or preference for rear alley access to these kinds of units.
Right.
Which would again help with emergency access for that kind of situation.
And we did make that as a suggestion or preference,
Yeah,
preference in
that's-
the R2 zone,
That's what
when you get
the
6 units.
research of most of the surrounding metropolitan area communities is they either provide alleys, especially when you get up with the multiple units with 6 and such, or a possible pedestrian pathway in a rear yard was substituted in some cases, something like that.
If you think what it's got to look like and where it's going to be, if I think
Our-
you have to have something like that.
Our trouble with actually just going ahead and requiring an alley setting was mainly based upon the likelihood, the characteristics of Canby, where we have the correct zoning that would allow these 6 attached unit townhomes, and thinking that if you required the alleys, we believe it would, in Canby, would be a detriment to it ever happening. Because alleys do cost more, because you have your improvement in the public street out front, and you also have to build another.
But you have condos that are completing right now that they provided for their own alley between the units.
Right. Right.
Well, we're
And I don't
trying-
think it was for safety, although I think it was more for client access
Right.
to get to their garages. But
That's right.
I think it's a tough, if you're trying to build condos without back access, and as you say, the only way to get to the middle is by jumping fences, I don't think you could sell them. But that gets back to, well, we'll leave it to the developer to figure out what he can pencil out, but then we get
Right.
to live with it for
We're trying
what
to
feels
give-
like forever.
Yeah.
You know,
We're trying to give the developer and the property owner
I don't,
some leeway as to how they design it.
and I understand, appreciate that. I don't mean to belabor this because I know we've got a lot to cover, so.
Okay. Also, if you look at our zoning map, and I think Laney is going to bring one up here in a minute.
I did.
Yeah. Anyway, it's very restrictive as far as the R2 zone here in Canby right now. There's not a whole lot of it, and there's not a whole lot of R1.5. But, so, because of that, we're trying to allow the property owner some leniency as far as how he develops the property. Sometimes you just can't do what, if we require that, there's some situations where they can't develop it that way. It's just too restrictive. The parcel might be a triangle, there might be other things that are very difficult to deal with as far as the size and shape of the parcel. There we go.
Well, I understand your concern, and my concern is that we're all going to be living here a long time, hopefully. And what the decisions we make now, we'll be looking at.
Yeah, as you can see, the R2 zone there is, there's some parcels that are large, but I think that's actually a mobile home park over there. But, right in there, yeah. But anyway, you can see most of the lots are small, very small. So it's going to be hard to develop those with the 6 unit or 12 units of townhomes. But there's a possibility they might buy the whole block and try it that way. Who knows what the developer's going to do in the future. And if they do, we want to put some possible restrictions on it to where they can design it in a way that's more livable.
Yeah, most of the R2 zones where you could do the townhomes, they're already developed, and so it would be redevelopment. That means the street pattern is already established. Therefore, there's no logical way they're going to build an alley, which is a master plan community, to have alleys. And so we would be prohibiting townhomes in our high-density zone district if we required alleys, I think.
Yes, I believe so. Okay, we'll change that to 10 feet. I think we have a consensus on that.
Consider it, anyway. Thank you.
Now, the next page, we put in a suggestion on the minimum and maximum lot area. We added in under A2, for townhomes, dwelling units having common wall constructions, we want a 3,000 square foot lot, minimum lot size. This also ties in with the density that's allowed in the zone. Now, in the R2 zone, you have a 14 units per acre density, and you have to have a maximum of 3,000 square foot lot in order to meet the density. So that's sort of automatic.
So maximum versus minimum for the two
Yeah,
different zones.
yeah. Whereas this one, the 6 units gives you a little more space, but the 3,000 square foot lots is generally what they do for a townhome anyway, in most cases. it would be hard to divide those and develop them with less than 3,000 square foot. So we added that in. Also, we changed our formula wording as to how we figure the density. It was, as you'd see under number 2, it was very difficult to understand how to calculate that, and it just didn't seem to work right. So we rewrote that so that it's much easier to use and more understandable as you're doing it. So if a property owner comes in and is trying to figure out his density so he can develop his little lot, this makes it a lot easier for him. Makes it much clearer as far as how to do it and how it works.
And you've actually taken that 3,000 and moved it up from down below, correct?
Up from what?
I'm looking at 1618030B4 on page 77 of the packet. You've got a straight delete of lots of 3,000 square foot each may be permitted
Oh, yeah,
by the Planning Commission for single-family dwellings having common wall.
Right, we just moved that over there.
Yeah, that's, you just,
Right.
I was trying to figure that out, you know. We're having to dredge up old memories here and old notes and figure out.
But that went better under the minimum density
No, I
maximum.
don't disagree with what you've done. I just want to make sure I understood it.
Okay. And on the next page, we added the chimney and fireplace and 2-foot projection again. And R2 zoning, 1620, page 1, we added the word townhome or townhouse under the permitted uses. And then here's the minimum density that we were talking about a minute ago. And we added the 3,000 square foot, and that's what is required. You can't do that without the 3,000 square foot. You're not going to meet the, if you don't have a maximum of 3,000, you're not going to meet the density. We figured that out. So that works out. The next page, on page 3 of 1620, we reworded this because we discussed this at one of our work sessions, and it wasn't very clear as how it was written. This was requested by one of our developers, and we reworded this, so I think it makes more sense.
I disagree.
Okay.
I think you added a lot of words to say exactly the same thing you were saying before, which I had a big problem with. And so I'm still opposed to what you have here, which is basically, if it's R1 with a plan of HDR, they don't have to do the 15-foot buffer. And I got big heartache with that. You go ahead with it. This isn't a vote, and I'm not. But I think it's a mistake because we get to live with those kinds of mistakes, those kinds of conditions. I won't call them a mistake, but you get to live with them for a long time. And all you have to do is drive out to the east side of town and you can see them popping up. And I just feel like it's not good. There needs to be some intermediate ground to help make the intermediate condition that can last for decades somewhat more livable.
Yeah, this would only apply when it was.
I understand that.
Yeah, you understand.
I understand that. And you can pull up the zone and you can look, and there's a whole bunch of single family there that are right now being loomed over, and this would just make a recipe for more of it. And I understand we need density.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
and this isn't going to. What I'm advocating doesn't make it easier for development, and I understand that. But we've all got to live here too.
Sure.
So what would you suggest?
I think you have to probably provide some kind of a step back. In other words, if they can come right up to if the 15-foot density is not, buffer is not required, they could come up there with a 35-foot wall.
Well, no.
Or is there, correct me, is there a step back?
Yes. What it says is, the last sentence says that criteria listed in the section can be used for normal setbacks in the zone, so you would automatically go to the normal setbacks.
So I'm looking right at, you're saying the final sentence?
Yeah, it says, and therefore available future height density when the multifamily development is not subject, when it's not subject to the 15-foot buffer, then you use the normal setbacks for the zone, which would be, if it's in the front yard, it would be probably a 20-foot setback, rear yards 15 and 20, or a side yard, you still have to maintain a 7-foot setback for all side yards in all the residential zones. So this would automatically
So this,
fall back to the 7-foot setback.
let me give you my own words. You're saying that we're not requiring the 15-foot setback. If I've got an R1 that's future HDR, and I've got an HDR, the 15-foot setback doesn't apply. It's the normal, which is 5.
7, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I don't, you know, you're not going to sell that one to me. It's not going to happen, okay? Not at 35 feet, 7 foot from the property line against a single family. Not happening.
I'm not
I don't want to
sure.
have to face a bunch of people in this audience and explain why it's a great idea.
I'm not sure what your concern is. Do you have a 7-foot setback? That's a normal setback for the zone.
Yeah, it's not a normal setback in R1 and not what the people are used to seeing. And you're just saying, okay, we understand you bought an R1 or you think you're in R1, but you're really not because the comp plan, which you have no normal idea about being a normal person, tells you that you really don't have that right. And this guy can come in and build at 35 feet, 7 feet off your property line. Like I said, you want to be in that public meeting and explain to him why we didn't break any rules and it's perfectly okay. I'm just telling you, those are miserable meetings. And if you want to have them, we'll have them. But you just need to be prepared. I'm just telling you right now,
Okay.
I'm opposed to this. You
Okay.
need to come up with some additional step back for that situation. In other words, it's not 35 feet, 7 feet in, it's whatever R1 is, and then another 10 or 15, they can step it up. And I understand that makes it more difficult and more costly, but they can also, you know, I'm just saying, you're not going to get me on board for that.
Okay.
Been in too many of those meetings.
Okay. Duly noted.
Any more feeling on?
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, what Mr. Mills said.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to, like Mr. Mills was saying, that, you know, these homeowners come in saying, hey, this new development's coming in and it's 7 feet off and it's really tall, and you say, well, that's the way the code's written, we can't do anything about it. And
Well, we just went through this with, I think it was Emerald, the development right down over by the
Fairgrounds.
fairgrounds. Neighbors came in, they're single-family, one-story dwellings, and the code says that they could have 2 stories right up to the setback, and they were concerned, we have no privacy anymore. And that was,
In fact,
do you remember that?
In fact, they ended up being 3 stories.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, do you remember that conversation, though,
Yeah.
that we had? Yeah.
Yeah.
And, so.
Well, those that are setbacks for the zone, 7 foot, you know, so.
So your proposal would be cut it down till,
It's very common that when you
10
have,
feet
but
in.
not, if you knew you were R1 there and you were going to be R1 and you had HDR next to it, you'd have to do this, okay? But because this is HDR, you can come right up against it, and then you've got 3 stories looming over your backyard.
yeah, that's
And what happens is most of those single families go to rental
yeah.
because nobody really wants to live in them permanently. And that's where you go. You basically say, okay, that's going to become a rental, then it's going to go away. And I have a concern that I always like to look at what the intermediate looks like. We say, okay, the long term, it looks like this, and that's great. It'll all be 3-story, but in the ensuing decades, which is usually what it ends up being, it's not 1 year or 5 years, this is what you get. And so you also end up with a degradation because you go from single-family homeowner to rental property, which is also needed. But
Dave, what do you?
Well, the thing is that if you're in an R1 zone and the neighbor's in R1 zone, you can build a 2-story home.
Yeah.
Up to the 7-foot setback, and if we meet the height restriction, you can go up even higher. if you want to. It's still going to be 7 foot. You're in an R1 zone. That's what the setback is.
That's what it is.
That's what it is. I don't think we're going to change the setback in all the residential zones.
I'm not suggesting that, what I'm saying is you're going to have to do. I'm just saying when this comes to the meeting time, when we're having to deal with this in public, you're not going to have my support in that situation. Because we've got to do something different, and I don't know what the answer is. I'm not smart enough.
So just to clarify, a single-family residential home in the R1 zone could be built up
7 foot.
7 feet.
35 feet.
Setback 35 feet high.
Yeah, 35 feet, 7 foot. That's what you can do right now. It's the side yard setback in all the residential zones is the same, 7 foot. No matter if you're an R1 and a half, an R1, or an R2, it's still 7 foot. In fact, they're the same for the front and rear. All residential setbacks are the same.
For the HDR, is there a different maximum height? Can that exceed 35 feet?
35 feet, right?
Or is it maxed out at 35 feet?
Nope, it's still the same 35 feet.
Yeah.
So there's no real difference between the HDR and the R1?
No. Still the same.
Just density.
The only thing is you
what
can get more
changes.
on the parcel as density, more units.
So instead of 7 feet, is it still 7 feet to the property line for HDR versus R1?
No, the other's still the same.
Right.
Yeah. They're still the same.
But what this is proposing to do, we indicated this is a code change requested by a developer that tries to redevelop property that is identified for transition in the future to high density. And what he's finding, because that's specifically what he does in town and has for 30 years, is that it makes it way difficult with the 15-foot buffer from the existing single-family zoning and home that also is designated high density for the future,
Right.
to get the adjacent property redeveloped when they have to honor that 15-foot setback over the 7-foot. Because he's only buying up 1 or maybe 2 lots to be able to do his high density. And that extra 7 foot makes it very difficult. That's what he says.
And your biggest problem, your biggest challenge will be when the homeowners come in, they don't know comp plan.
Right.
They don't know.
Well,
they don't
they've
know.
been there for 30 or 40 years.
They own their home, they live in R1, that's what it always has been. And then we're going to tell them, oh no, we changed this on you 25 years ago. And, it wasn't a vote, you didn't have a vote. We just were looking ahead and we decided to do this, we being the planning commission that was there at the time. Sorry about that, but this is what we've got now, and this is what we can do to you and what we're doing to you. And we get to explain that to them.
Well, and I might put a caveat on that, is that the reason that the city did that to them, and they were notified, but they might not have been aware,
Yeah.
because of periodic review required by the state of Oklahoma, that you have
Oregon.
to have, state of Oregon, that you have to provide a variety of housing types, therefore in different zoning districts, and you have to have a certain allotment of high density, medium density, and low. And if you don't have the required acreage that you need in each, then they required you in periodic review to designate more high-density zoning. So we did that where we thought it was most appropriate, because we had to do it somewhere to
Right.
someone.
Yes.
And
And that's exactly it. You have
That's
to do
right.
it. I mean, the future dictates we have to do this.
Right.
and that's actually.
And so again,
Everything is, I understand
I agree with
everything
you 100%. It's this balancing act. Is we've got a live developer telling us that it makes it very difficult because of this protective measure for the adjacent, it's not non-conforming, but the existing development that's in that neighborhood, and he's trying to move it towards providing the high-density development, and he finds it very difficult to do that. In fact, We changed one other regulation several years ago that took protections away from those existing single families because they were required at that time in the R2 zone that he changes the zoning to so he can redevelop. He buys it, changes the zoning, then tries to redevelop. But several years ago, those in the high-density zone, R2, were subject to the step-up height standards, as well as this buffer strip. We got rid of the step-up height standards because it was preventing any redevelopment next to these single-family homes from happening unless they were able to buy up tons of property and build a huge complex, then that 7 foot didn't matter that much. But when they're only buying 1 or 2 lots, which is the norm, because we don't have huge outfits coming in to build Sequoia Grove apartment complexes.
You know, the other part of this is if you don't make moves like that, even if we do make moves like that as a city to improve and increase our density, you know, our latitude is going to be taken away by the state at some point. But, you know, we're in danger of them already coming in and changing the rules of R1 on us right now to force some other things. So, you know, I'm not unsympathetic to why this is being done, and I'm not suggesting it's being done in a inappropriate manner, but I'm just warning y'all that as we do this kind of thing, at some point we're going to have to deal with some unhappy people, and I've had to do more than my share of that, I guess. So you just have to be prepared to answer why, and sometimes you don't have a very good why, except somebody decided this 20 years before your time, and they did it. They were doing the best job that they could.
Right.
But you know, I just go back again to looking at what the interim condition is and trying to make sure we do the best we can with the interim condition, knowing that where we need to be long-term is the higher density. I don't pretend to be smart enough to have an answer, and I'm not telling you that, you know, obviously you don't have to, you can stick with what you have. And I'm just providing you with some input that I think it's got problems when we do that.
Sure.
And there will be problems.
We realize that.
And maybe that's the best we can do.
We realize that not everybody is always happy when it comes to planning. That's the nature of it.
Not always, never.
That's the nature of it. In the meantime, we have Oregon state statutes to deal with this, and we have to be compliant with what they're telling us we have to do as far as keeping our densities and maintaining our periodic reviews that way.
I've always been curious about that. I mean, this is as an aside. So what if you just told them, no, we're not going to do that? As a city, we've decided to, you know, not go that route.
You're going to slow down development of those kinds of properties.
Probably
Well,
hear
gee,
from
that's
an
too bad,
assistant
but-
attorney general with the
And
Department
you'll
of
increase the
Justice.
We
cost.
get a visit from the Attorney General.
Well, so you'd hear from the assistant attorney general, their representative, and
And-
Well, not in.
Yeah, but what could,
But
LCDC
you're
would
asking
be here
about whether we did this
fire me
code
a bond
change,
here.
whether we did this code change.
Yeah, I think actually you find out that it is very, very difficult for the state to really force these issues outright a lot of the times. And so, but it does result in the long time through various audits of how well are we doing in meeting our statewide goals. And that's when you get these new legislative proposals that
Yeah.
come forward that are trying to force you then to allow
More density.
crazy things in every single-family zoning district because not enough cities are voluntarily auditing their codes in a way that makes it more friendly for higher density to occur.
I wonder why that is.
Yeah. And that's why we're getting these proposals now, because they think that the only way we're going to get more affordable housing is to allow higher densities, et
On the
cetera.
land that we have already.
Because the land is what
Back.
causes the problem. It costs so much that, and you can only do so much for construction costs. And so it's the land cost that you can reduce by increasing density and going up.
And we have urban growth boundaries to help us keep that density. And if we could spread out all over the countryside, and that's called California. So,
No, I just came from there. That's simply not true.
well, except in Palm Springs.
I think I'm agreeing with Jeff down. I'm going to slide on down here.
John, you know, I feel like I've been beating up on you guys.
No, not at
unfairly,
all, not at
you
all.
know,
We appreciate
But
that.
I mean, I've had,
input.
you know, people, meetings where people have just flat rejected code because they felt like it usurped their rights.
Right.
And we've developed new code for them, and they rejected it, and they rejected it largely because of what we're talking about right now. Exactly this. Flat rejected in a high school auditorium full of very angry people that we didn't consult with them, even though we hold 5 years' worth of workshops,
Yeah. Well, we're
trying
going
to
to
do the
have
very
public
best we
hearings.
could. And in the end, we were doing what their elected officials told us to do. But they still were in a room full of angry people that thought we were trying to take away their property rights.
Right.
And they were
they
giving
were
them away, they were already giving them away, so.
Yeah.
All right, I'm shutting up. I know we got to get going here.
Okay.
I mean, I'm all for telling the state no.
Me too. No,
I'm not suggesting
I'm all
stop,
for it.
stop thinking a whole.
I know Joe's probably not going to like us, but
I honestly don't think this is an absolute killer provision, but it's one of those, and like I said, was one of two. One got approved by the Planning Commission and eliminated to make it a little bit easier to build apartments or higher density next to existing single-family homes when they're able to rezone in accordance with the comprehensive plan to the high density, right next to still a single-family.
Basically, that's why we have the zone. It's there for that reason.
And this is just one of two protective measures we've had in our code for quite some time. And we've also had very little conversion to high density. And so this developer is telling us these are the reasons why he successfully got one of them changed to do away with the step-up height. What that, if you recall, what that means is for you to be 2 stories or 3 stories tall on an adjacent property, you have to set back that second story or third story even further away,
Right.
which is kind of like this buffer, except the first story can still be at the regular setback.
Right.
It's the second story and third story that has to be further away.
Right.
You know, it concerns me that here we have spent several years, I don't know, this is my 8th or 9th or being here, you know. And it's occurred to me from time to time that we make these decisions for development, and people come in and say, you know, we moved here for X reason, and now where there was, you know, wide open spaces, had more of a country feel, and now we're going to be Beaverton. And that is my biggest fear, is that we are making decisions here that are going to take the real meaning of can be as defined in the past and make it Beaverton, the worst parts of Beaverton. And if you ask the people out there, took a vote, they don't want to live in Beaverton either, or else they'd live there. And so, I don't know what you do with that.
Well,
But my attitude is I'm
come and take it.
yeah.
well, we'd have to
Stay-
expand our urban growth boundaries to be Beaverton. We can't get that large, that's how you do that.
Yeah, but we say that today.
Yeah.
But they're not, you know, I mean,
But that might come up someday,
I'm sure moving the boundary for them is a huge deal too.
yeah. But, you know, you have to
It's
look
just
at
huge.
the other side of that, too. You have people that own property here, and they have property rights, too, to develop their property if they want to do that. For instance, if they have a 10-acre lot, and maybe they're growing a few crops or something like that, which happens quite often, and the family members get together and say, we don't want to grow these crops anymore, we want a subdivision here. And it's exactly what happens. And you can't take away their right.
We just went through that, or I can't remember the name of the street, where,
Pine Street has one.
yeah, it goes down past the golf course.
Maple.
Maple, yeah, Maple, and
Yeah,
we,
Maple Spring.
Monte Cucos had to give up,
Yeah.
ceded some property there, as I recall. Is that right, Brian?
Some right away or something.
Yeah, something like that.
But we had that exact same thing happen, it was on Pine Street, and there was a nice little parcel of land, it was an island, surrounded by the city, and the property owners who had owned it for a generation, I guess, passed away, and their kids decided they wanted to sell that and develop a subdivision. That's what we have right now.
Sure.
It's in the process, so.
And that's why we have code, so they can do that, and we can do it without, significantly deteriorating the character of the community we live in. That's what we're supposed to be able to do here. But we have, you build more homes, you take out a piece of farmland or trees. And that's true. And that gets
The
back to
unfortunate thing about
Yeah.
Canby is that we're surrounded by farmland and forests and state parks, and that's not going to change. We're not going to be, well, it'll be very difficult for it to change. If you want to try to expand an urban growth boundary, you better have some good reasons out onto that high-value farmland out there.
I think
Woodburn has done it,
that's-
but they have had a lot of trouble with that.
It's difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And you never get the acreage that you want. They'll ask for 150 acres, they might end up with 50.
Well,
Yeah.
you'll have all kinds of people coming in and recalculating your calculations for you if you say
Sure,
you need more land.
absolutely.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, and that's, it's not easy to expand an urban growth boundary. So, That's planning.
Sorry to have us get bogged down.
Well, that was a vigorous conversation, I like that.
Okay.
Well, let's try to move on here. Oh, well, let's go to 16.20, page 5, and that's where we talked about the R2 zone and the six dwelling units, and I think we've already discussed this.
Yes.
Yeah, and so we could probably move on from that. Residential design standards, 1621, page 3. We had added in townhouses and duplex to be exempt from our garage facade projection standards. And we decided that that wasn't a good idea. We would like to keep that. Townhouses and duplexes should also meet those garage standards, which doesn't allow you to extend the garage more than 5 feet unless you do certain design standards in the dwelling facade.
So
So put a window up there, or else put a porch out to come out as far as the garage, something like that. This gets back to what we were talking about, breaking up the continuity of the facade. And that's why these design standards and garage standards are in there, to do that. And we decided, well, that wasn't a good idea to have them not meet number 2 below, is what it is. Number 2 below is the garage facade projection standard.
And that's where you're driving them to. That's where you're driving the townhouses to 2 below.
Right.
Yes.
We're going to make them do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The next page, page 5, the measuring floor elevations at the front street side of the dwelling shall not exceed 30 inches above the highest curb level. We had that in there, and we changed that to the average of the 2 measured elevations, which makes more sense.
Yeah.
Did we already argued about that?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, that's why it's
We had
changed.
discussed that, and I think that's where I thought they were heading anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, and we changed that. That's that yellow. So I think the next one, we move ahead here, is 1622, page 2. And the bakery in this chapter, we made it a permitted use instead of a conditional use.
So, one very broad question. We've chosen 7,000 square feet as like, you know, for brew pubs and bakeries and all this stuff to allow them into the more restrictive zones.
Yeah, downtown, basically.
How do we choose 7,000?
That is actually the standard industrial classification.
Okay, good.
Oh, I thought you were going to
Good
tell me
answer.
the library's square footage.
I wasn't
Well,
sure
maybe
how
that
that
too.
came about, but I could see where
But,
you'd be
you know,
very
they do
consistent
have
with it.
8,000 square foot, we can talk about
All
that.
right, no.
It's probably a modification or a variance.
I just was curious where it came from. Thank you. That answers my question.
A couple of other changes in the definition. Things come up, you know, people say, well, you should do this or that. And for instance, we had, the church is a permitted use, and someone pointed out that the correct terminology these days is places of worship. So we just added that in. We want to, I lifted, yeah, well, never mind. But also mortuary, apparently there's people that have mortuary for pets. And so
Yeah.
we added that in.
Pet cemetery. Is that correct?
Yeah, mortuary. Pet
Okay.
cemetery. Yep.
Just made a movie about it.
OO and the second page, the next page, page 4, brew pub and confectionery store, candy store. Basically, we made them permitted uses. We moved them over from conditional uses. And again, the 7,000 square foot. I think we didn't do anything there. Yeah. Then the next correction is actually on 16.24, page 2. Again, it's the same thing. Brew pub and confectionery store. The next change is the CC zone chapter, and we put repeal on that. That's the one that isn't in the comprehensive plan map. And the next change is pretty minor also. 16.32, page 2. We looked at this, and this is a M1 zone, I believe, and we had added self-storage and many warehouses into this industrial zone. And we looked at that again and realized that these are actually more of a commercial use, the many warehouses, than industrial uses. So we already have them in a CR zone and a mixed-use zone, CM, and a commercial and industrial. So we felt that they really didn't belong in our industrial park. It's warehouses, but not many warehouses. That's
Agreed.
I agree with that.
That's,
thing.
yeah, absolutely.
Go to the next one, and I believe that is minor change on chapter 16.41, page 7. And that was the drive-through provision wasn't really clear. So we sort of added a few words to that. Can increase the setback to 20 feet maximum.
So,
Go ahead.
just a real quick question, taking you back very briefly to 1626, the CC zone. That is a complete repeal. We're taking all that out.
Right.
Because there was a couple of things where we started to edit, it looked like there, but we're just taking it out.
No, most of the uses in there are allowed in the CR zone.
Yeah, I got that. I'm just thinking, my little bookkeeper brain here is trying to make sure that
Yeah,
you are just
the
taking it out.
CC
Those edits are not going to,
I don't think we made any, well,
there were a couple, yeah.
yeah, rear yard, very minor thing, yeah, rear yard. We added the setback.
Yeah. And
Actually,
the rear yard, you had a rear yard restriction and stuff
right,
like that. That's
and so
okay.
it was a minor thing, and
Yeah.
then we realized this chapter isn't on our comp plan map, or the zone map. It was in our books, but not there, and so we just took it out.
And I guess I have a question on 1632. I know you're catching up with you here. 1632-010T. And if you're looking
Yeah, that's what we're
if you
just
look at the
talking about.
PDF, it's on page 118. And
Oh, it's a different page.
I think in the package, it's listed as an addition, but when you look at it here, I think it's shown as a deletion. Shown in the draft as a delete and on the summary as an add.
Yeah, you must be on the different page, 16.32, page 2, is the one that we eliminated
Yeah,
the self-storage units from the M1 zone.
right.
So apparently it's different on your,
So you've eliminated it from the light industrial M1.
yeah, which is in our,
Okay. But so why do I have? Never mind, I must be confused here. Sorry to hold you up.
or here, next, okay. I think the next one is on 16.42, page 1. We just added the word automotive service station instead of service station. And the same on the next page, automotive service station. And we changed the wording on 16.42, page 49, automotive service station sign standards. The fascia of a gas station canopy, we put gas station canopy is considered building frontage. And instead of saying can be permitted as, we said can be utilized to calculate sign standards for wall signs. This makes it easier to read and clarifies that. I think the next change is 16.44, page 4. And this is what we discussed, this is the changes we made because we had a discussion about this at one of the other hearings. And we wanted to make sure that what we were saying here about the removal of recreational vehicles or manufactured homes that were being occupied in violation. We wanted to make sure that we were clear about that, I think, when we made the changes. And it says the violation, we added in, if the recreational vehicle or manufactured structure is occupied in violation of these provisions, the violation shall be resolved in accordance with this title and in compliance with any applicable ORS. Then we added, the property owner shall make a reasonable effort to resolve the violation in conjunction with the city's enforcement action.
I think your wording is perfect. I think it's great.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. I think that was your question. Yeah.
So, yeah,
Go ahead.
no problem with the language.
Okay,
I guess I wanted to take you back,
we're going back. Yeah. Okay,
just to
where
make
do
a
you wanna go?
comment. 1635-040A1,
35.
PDF package 126. I think that's right. And this gets into, I think, if I got the page number right, it's going from 12 to 3 employees per acre for, is it M2?
Okay, for the industrial.
And I think that's,
yeah.
you're leaving
I
that,
think you're on the wrong page, but.
I might have the wrong page.
Wrong packet.
You're in the wrong packet.
No, he's on the right packet. He's looking at it on the internet, and he's looking at it by the PDF.
I
numbers.
just said PDF page.
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah.
thank you.
That's right. So do we have a PDF?
So what page would that be in section? Because they don't have. a PDF.
126.
126. And it's a place where we had a discussion about,
Well, since they don't have the PDF, they don't have.
Well,
that
go
page.
ahead. I
okay,
think-
well, no, I
Well,
can, hang on,
but we know what
it's
you're talking- we know what
page
you're talking
35,
about. Yeah, go ahead.
page 3 of
We don't have to
that
look at it, we
section.
know what you're talking about.
Okay, and it was just where we had a discussion about going from 12 employees per acre to 3 employees per acre. And I don't recall what the sense of the commission was on that. I know I thought that was a little too big a step, but And I just passed that back along.
I think everybody else on the commission was all right with it. I didn't make it up.
Okay.
Well, and that's because we, not that I have, but you in times past had said every time somebody had come in here, we'd been like, yeah, we don't care about that.
We're trying to keep conditional use permit applications to a minimum by taking that down.
Yeah.
I get that, but then I have this fear of 3 employees per acre, but, okay. Just want to make that comment.
Okay.
We're done.
I think the next addition, there was an addition on 16.52, page 3. And this had to do with non-conforming uses. We wanted to make this clear under 16.52035. It says the alteration or expansion of dwelling units in the C1 zone. And the wording wasn't clear at all. It says the alteration or expansion of dwelling units in the C1 zone shall be permitted subject to specific requirements of that zone. Well, if you went to the zone, it didn't allow you to do that. The requirements of the zone didn't allow you to expand it. So we put in their development standards, which means, all right, you can go to that zone, and you simply, we thought the intent there was, they just want you to do the development standards. They want to allow the use, the expansion, but you have to meet the development standards of the zone.
So I didn't have those in my package to even see or review.
Same here.
I couldn't find
They weren't in my
them. Just so you know, all of the 1652s and the 1650-050, I couldn't find the 1652s in the PDF anywhere, so I wasn't able to review that language.
I don't find it up here either.
Yeah, well, yeah, I have it here. Was it on there? We copied this right out of the,
I get that, guys, but, you know, if it's not there, I can't look at it.
Kind of thought it was just me.
can we bring up 1652? 1652, and we'll go to that section. And we'll
I
look at-
searched and searched for it. I mean, I used the little magnifying glass and looked everywhere for it. And it's referred to, but there's no section.
If you go to that chapter.
Because I have the packet you have, and it doesn't have it in it.
I thought I copied those right off here.
We missed.
Nobody has it?
Well, it goes 49 to 54.
There's a couple of other places I don't want to, where things are out of order. You've got to find stuff, and it's like 42 is buried, 44 is buried in the middle of 42. There's a couple of places like that where the only way you can find it is to search for it and get lucky. It's not in order.
Wasn't aware that was happening.
Neither was
I noticed that with 44, it was in where it should be.
Well, the language for the manufactured home thing was, that's 42, and it was in the wrong place, at least in my
I.
package.
Can't, it's not in there.
And there.
And I'm not smart enough to know how to move it, so. At least on purpose up back here.
How about 60? Yeah,
60?
60.
I have that, yes.
Everybody has 60.
I did not have 1658, not found, which is, you know, it's old language, it's,
Yeah, I don't have that either. It's-
yeah, so.
Yeah, there was no changes in that chapter, 1658. Okay, go to
Which page?
Page 3. .035. Right there. Right there, yeah. So if you read that, it says the alteration or expansion of dwelling units in the C1 zone shall be permitted. Okay, so if you have a dwelling in the C1 zone and you want to alter or expand it, that's permitted, subject to the specific requirements of that zone. Well, that was confusing. And what you want to do is use the development standards in that zone.
So if I have a single family, originally built as a single family house, and I've got a welding shop in back and it's now a welding business, but I want to modify the house structure to make it more
Yeah.
office friendly and perhaps client visit friendly, how do I do that?
Well, if it's in a C1 zone, a commercial zone, and you're using it as commercial use, it's permitted, so that, this is just for dwelling units in a C1 zone.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what you're talking about.
Being
So if you have a house-
being used as a dwelling unit.
Yeah, being used as a dwelling
Because a
unit.
lot of times you have dwelling units that are not being used as.
Right, right. There's some dwelling units in the C1
All right.
zone.
Got it.
Yeah, and so you can expand that, but you have to use the development standards, requirements of that zone. That's all we're at. Pretty simple. And the second chain, if you go down to 16.52050, this was confusing because if you read it, it says authorization to grant or deny expansion of non-conforming structures or change of non-conforming use. What we wanted to add there is another sentence saying authorization does not include expansion of existing non-conforming uses. You can authorization to grant or deny expansion of non-conforming structure or change of non-conforming use. So we wanted to add, it does not include expansion of existing non-conforming use.
So
You can change the non-conforming use, but we don't want you to expand the
So I'm
existing.
looking at a lot of text up here. Is what you're describing in this text that I'm looking at here? Or-
The very first sentence, the bold, right there. Oops. Go back, come down. Go back up, Lane, yeah. Back up, yeah. There, 16050,
Yeah, I'm looking at that.
okay, right there, authorization to grant or deny an expansion of a non-conforming structure or change of a non-conforming use.
Okay.
So we wanted to add, this does not include expansion of an existing non-conforming use. For instance, if you have a non-conforming use and you want to change it over to another non-conforming use, that's what they're asking for.
Well,
But
that's
if you-
not, you just, what if they want to expand it for continued use in the current non-conforming use?
Well, that's what we don't want them to do. For instance, we don't want them to expand an existing non-conforming use. If you
Okay,
want-
so it doesn't matter, so if they have some kind of non-conforming,
Right, so they say they have a store or something. and-
Yeah.
And it's a non-conforming use in the zone, in that zone. Well, the idea of non-conforming uses is we want it to go back to the original use. We don't want it to continue to be non-conforming. So that's what, we wanted to add that in, so it was strict. We don't want you to expand your existing non-conforming use. In other words, don't build on a bigger shop, you know, if it's not allowed in the zone to begin with. But you can change what you have, but don't change the square footage. In other words, if you have a store.
you could
can change
modernize it,
over.
but you couldn't expand it.
Right, you can change it to another one, but don't expand it. Don't come in and ask to build onto something that isn't allowed, in other words. But if you want to, if you're using the square footage for commercial use and you want to flip it over to another commercial use without expanding them, well, that's what we're trying to do, is restrict it there. That's come up and caused problems before, and we're just trying to make it easier to use the code right there. Now, let's go to 1660, and this is the major and minor partitioning. We did some rewording there.
Should.
Yeah, that's in there.
You don't
Yeah, we are. Is everybody on that one?
271 is the
That's
PDF pack.
16.60.020,
Oh. 69.
the first paragraph there. There was some discussion about this, and we simply added this in to help rectify that discussion.
Yeah, this is the email that I sent out, I think. Let me read
Yeah.
it.
Anyway, it says, we added in, the planning director shall send the partition request directly to the planning commission for their decision if there are issues presented by the applicant or surrounding property owners that cannot be resolved prior to the issuance of the decision.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I
Yeah,
mean, it's much easier, I had thought through and even took a shot at drafting a code provision that did fee waiver, but that's a pain. I mean, this seems to solve the issue, and the issue was effectively, are we shutting down the right of a citizen to come in here and
Right. And there's no need
Listen to us talk.
need to change the appeal fees or anything.
Yeah.
Because it's not,
It
there's
just
no
gets
need to
killed.
appeal it, it's going to come here anyway.
Right, and the concern wasn't whether Brian would do that. It's,
Right, somebody
after
down the road, you
Brian's
understand, yeah.
gone,
Yeah.
whoever's next.
Yeah. And also, as far as a major partition, there's basically the criteria is the same except for 040F, which simply states that you have to add the street, which dedicate a street. That's the only difference between a major and partition. So why separate them? It only causes confusion and makes it more cumbersome.
Are you guys good with that change in there?
And as a side point, I went ahead and did a little research in this and to see how many jurisdictions actually sent their partitionings, didn't send their partitionings to the planning commission, they let the planning director do it. And I checked, and all of these cities, it's a type 1 or type 2, the planning director makes a decision. And Salem, Albany, Woodburn, Eugene, McMinnville, Dallas, 6 of them. They all did it. So they're all either a type 1 or type 2. And a couple, I think Eugene has this one, I'm not sure if it was Eugene, but there's under ORS, let's see, it's 197, 360 through 380, you can do an expedited partitioning, which simply adds more speed to it. It goes, but there's other provisions with that one that sort of we were a little reluctant to get into, as far as there were some income requirements and stuff like that. Well, the partitioning isn't that much; it just goes through anyway. So.
There was some discussion before on this minor and major partition
Yeah.
about the fee structure. And so we
Right.
did some research on that, and we've already turned in our master fee schedule changes for the council to adopt that will be effective July 1st. And what we found is that our appeal of a planning director's decision that we had at $1,600 and something by state statute is limited to $250 now. So we
When
changed it to $250.
We got the number right.
you may want to let the
And
chair
that's
know
what was
about that.
suggested here, is that
Yeah.
we go with
I remember that.
$250. And that's what we were
Yeah, we're geniuses.
looking, yeah, that's basically it.
So did we charge people $1,600 when the statute mandated that we?
I didn't try to go back that far, but it's
That would
been
be
years and years since if
norm.
I've had an appeal of my decision.
And
I
usually
don't know
if-
if I've had any.
Usually it's a cooperative effort.
Yeah.
A number of neighbors will get together and split the cost, and usually hire a land use professional if they get real strong about it, and they'll share the cost. I had a brief aside I wanted to mention here, and I wanted to recognize Ryan for taking the extra effort to help us and guide us here, but I guess I also had to recognize a concern that I have had ingrained in me from numerous repeated training, that when the email goes out from one commissioner to a group of commissioners, to all the commissioners, and that email asks for input or suggestions, my teachings tell me that's deliberation outside of the public arena.
You're talking about Sunshine Act stuff?
Yes. And if you look online, you can check at any planning commissioner site. Many of the sites will lead you to that. The Oregon cities will warn you against doing that. And Ryan, that's why I didn't reply to you, because of that having been thumped into my head over repeated years.
Yeah, and I appreciate that.
And it's not that we can't communicate like directly, and I think in terms of things like, hey, you're going to be there, yes, no, those kinds of things. But if we start going after input from one another, what do you think, John? I don't know, what do you think? And how about this idea? That's kind of the way I was taught. That's deliberating outside of the public venue. And so that's why I didn't reply, and I wanted to explain myself there and offer that was why I was silent on the
No, I
email.
appreciate that.
So,
Does it apply even if it's a work session?
you can't have a work session by email done. I mean, that's what I was, you
I'm just
can't do
asking a
that.
question.
That's just, no, it's got to be in a public venue. It's got to be where people, you can have it online, we can put it on the TV, we can have, but no, you can't do deliberations by email.
Okay.
At
Well,
least,
Don't get me
and I mean,
fined.
Cammy may have a different position, and Ryan, you're an attorney, so you can have a different
I should
opinion.
know better is what you're saying.
But I'm just saying that that's what I was taught.
Yeah,
And
no,
I'm
that
from a
makes
different
sense.
jurisdiction, so I bring that up, and I'm not going to shut up. So,
All righty then.
Okay. 16.60, page 5, we made a minor change right there. And we were allowing 1 year for completion of a tentative plat approval and the survey. The survey must be completed within 1 year, and you can get 1 year extension. Well, we'd like to change that to 2 years and give the property owner more time to get a survey and then recorded. It's just a,
Back when the economy was slow, 2009, 10, 11, 12, we were approving partitions, and we were sending out reminder letters for several years for people to get their final partition plat filed of record, because you have a time frame and people weren't getting it done, and we had to send out reminder notices.
they would have had to start all over again.
Yeah, and that's what it amounts to, is if you don't follow the code and request an extension in writing, then it expires and you have to start completely over again, which would be not very user-friendly, because partitions are often not done by developers, but by individual property owners and such.
It just gives them more time.
So it's several other cities have 2-year time periods, so we didn't think it was a huge thing to
That makes
do
sense.
that.
Okay, the next change is a 16.64 subdivision chapter, and it's page 4, and this is a whole new thing that we'd like to add. And I think Brian might have mentioned this when we first started, that there was we had a situation where private streets were created and inside of a subdivision, and the developer tried to include half the street width as part of his square footage for his lot, which meant that he had less room to build on his lot, and it was impractical, and it was actually denied. And so what we wanted to do here to prevent that in the future,
Can I interrupt? Where are we?
16.64, page 4. You have 16 point, it's a subdivision chapter.
Which section?
would be, there's no section yet, we're going to add one.
Okay.
Okay, but we're going to add it to section 16.64010, streets. And that's the very first section in that chapter. And if you go all the way to the very end of all the alphabetical letters, to after O, we're going to add P under streets. So it's all under that 16.64010 streets.
So I understand you're breaking that,
We're going to add a whole new,
okay, but we just don't have the language.
right, I'm going to
Oh,
read the
okay.
language. We just did it this afternoon.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, so.
It's not in there.
So in order to prevent that from happening again, where a property owner can use the center of the street over to include in the square footage to meet design standards or whatever, and end up not having a developable subdivision, we're going to add under, as P, private streets created within a new subdivision or partitioning shall be designated as a tract on a submitted plat map. So if you have the property owner or developer designate the private street inside the subdivision as a tract, you cannot use it as part of the square footage for the lots. It's a separate tract. Okay? And that will prevent that. That all it takes is one sentence. All right. We can move on to final procedures in the subdivision chapter. We just, that's a 16.68, page 1. We put the 2-year approval for the tentative plat in that one too. It listed the submittal of subdivision plat under section 16.68.020.
Yeah.
And we just changed the 1 year to 2 years. And the next minor change was a typo, actually, and from previous years, under 16.76 requirement chapter, under B, there was a sentence that said, the average area per dwelling unit shall not be less than that allowed within a zoning district in which the subdivision is located unless alternative lot layout is used pursuant to 16.04040B. Well, that was a definition of something, and the definition has nothing to do with this.
How'd you find that?
So I just happened to look at it. Several years
Some
ago.
attention to detail there, I like it.
Yeah, and so it actually should be 16.64040B. It's not 1604, it's 1664. It's in chapter 64. And alternative lot layout is under that section. Okay. And the next one is a simple title change in chapter 16.88, page 1.
Yeah.
We added under this, it has text amendments, comprehensive plan, and we added and transportation planning. That's all under this section. So if you're looking for that, it will be a lot easier to find it. And chapter 16.89, page 13, there's a minor addition there of a change. Under the neighborhood meetings, under 16.889.070 C1, it says the appointed chair and all active members of neighborhood associations in whose boundaries the application lies, so you have to notify them. We took out and all active members. The appointed chair of any neighborhood association whose boundaries the application lies in. So the appointed chair can notify.
So you're
all the
notifying
community
one
members.
person.
Yeah, one person instead of trying to.
That feels shaky to me. I
Yeah,
mean,
why do we make
That's
that?
because the chair of the neighborhood associations have a, what do you call it, a list? What, listserv or a, they have a listing where they can send out notification to every member
Okay.
of that neighborhood association. We don't have.
So you don't want to send 350 notifications to Tofty Farms, is basically why we're making the change
We
here.
don't have the list anyway.
What we want to do is alert the neighborhood association chair that if he thinks it's important, that he then send out a notice to everyone that's in the neighborhood that would potentially be way outside of our normal radius.
I guess,
Because that's what it's amounting to, is that,
I get taking all active members off, and I'm fully sympathetic. I'm a little worried about just having a single point contact. It feels like it ought to be, I don't know how our neighborhood organizations are organized. Usually, in the town I came from, they were, there was usually a kind of an executive committee group of, like 3 or 4 or 5 people that kind of were the leaders of it. And I just feel like relying on one person feels a little bit,
we could say the officers, but typically in Canby, you're lucky if you have one active officer of the neighborhood association.
that's why I don't know what the reality is here, It's just like, if you're lucky to have one, do you have one? Too, so.
Right.
I only raise that concern, I'm not telling you to not do it this way, or suggesting you not do it this way.
Actually, it
Just
says
a
the applicant
concern.
shall mail notice to the
Right.
meeting. It's the applicant anyway, not us.
It's just an administrative thing. I mean, every time that we have an application, they read the code and it says, oh, well, how am I going to find out all of the owners? How do I know where the boundaries are?
Yeah.
And who's the chair? So we'll give them the chair and we say, well, really, all you need to do is notify the chair, and they can make the decision as to whether they're going to notify everybody in their neighborhood association.
And we usually don't have
Which
anything to
are-
do with that anyway. It's the neighborhood association.
So, so the neighborhood associations here don't have any formal linkage to the city in the form of regular meetings or money or
No.
space or supplies. They're totally independent.
Right.
They're civil matters.
We do have on our webpage a identification of the 4 neighborhood groups that exist. and, a map of their boundaries.
Oh, good. I should know that.
But this is a neighborhood.
But they're not required. They're, if another neighborhood association wanted to form, then they could do that
Oh.
on their own, and then we'd add them to our list. Not every property in town is a part of a neighborhood association.
Thank goodness.
All right, the last page, 1689, page 15, is a simple change. I believe it said zoning administrator, and we changed it on the last page to planning director on administrative review.
That'd be page 16.
Yep, the last page, 16, yeah, 1689, page 16, under the new administrative review criteria.
But that whole text is added from the previous version you sent us. Everything here that's bold underlined was
Yeah,
not in the
we've
previous
discussed
version.
that the last meeting, yeah.
We discussed it, but we hadn't seen it, I don't think.
I believe so. It should have been contained in the other packets. Yeah.
I don't think it was there. I'm going to look right now, because I don't think it was there.
But we
But
did,
it's a moot
we
point.
did
It's a
mention
moot
that,
point
discussed
anyway.
it the last time, I'm sure. But there's just a minor change on the last page of that.
Not there. Not there. In the 311 package, it's not there. So we haven't seen this text before.
Can we bring that up?
In my notes, I said should have been tealed.
Yeah, it was in here.
It's not in here.
Well-
It's not in the package that you sent us in
Yeah,
PDF.
apparently it didn't go out.
Okay.
With everything else last time.
It's up.
There it is, right there.
Yeah, but that's
That's the 422. No, I see it there.
this.
In the 422 package,
today's
which is
packet.
today.
He said it wasn't in the previous one.
It wasn't in the 311 package.
It could have been.
It could have been before that, yeah.
Could have been.
In fact,
Oh,
I
it
think,
could have been. You're
I
right.
think we had this in the original
Might have been,
changes, yeah.
going back.
Beginning right from the very start of this, I think we had that in
It's
there.
not in the 225 package. I'm going to the 211 right now.
Is there an issue with it that we need to?
Well, we just haven't read it.
Yeah, you just need to review it tonight to make sure you see everything, if there's a question about it ever having been in.
And what this amounts to is there are certain things that come up in the daily planning workings of the code where you need to address things. For instance, I think
I've read the language and I don't have a problem with what's written here. The only thing I was a little fussy about is, this is going to sound pretty basic, is when do you use this? Because it's like,
okay, well, that's what I was saying. What we're going to, things come up like, for instance, a good example is a medical hardship mobile home. We don't get many of those, but if we get one up, came in and say, I want to put up a medical hardship mobile home, there's no chapter for that. So we would address it with administrative review with a few criteria to make sure it fit into the neighborhood and things like that. Another example is, say, there's a residential home goes in, well, they're permitted. And so is a medical hardship. But say a residential home goes into one neighborhood, and they're permitted outright under state law. But they also need licenses and from the state. Well, we don't know, they can come in and just set up housekeeping and open up this business, basically, and we don't know if they have a license. We don't know anything about them. It's permitted use under state law. It's listed as permitted uses in our code because we have to. So, but we can tell them, wait a minute, we want to find out if you have licenses. Do you have state licenses? So we want you to file an administrative review so we can look at, that gives you a means of providing us with what we need to see to make sure you're licensed to operate in our city under the state. In other words, we would know nothing about them otherwise. But a good example is, for instance, a medical hardship requires a doctor's certificate from a physician saying that this person needs this dwelling there for medical reasons. And we have no way of addressing that unless we have an administrative review. We can go in and ask them for a form, doctor's certificate, stating that this person, signed by the physician, stating that this person needs this for medical reasons on this property. And we can address that through the administrative review. Basically, that's all it is. It gives the planning department a way of addressing things that really don't come up and aren't usually addressed as any other way. Okay.
Thanks for all your hard work on this.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
And I guess I'd
Thanks for that
I'd spread
input.
that around to this whole thing. You guys have had a tremendous undertaking here. We've been picking at you pretty hard tonight, so thank you for all of your hard work.
Well, thank you. That's why we're here, to get input from you guys. Find out.
So how often does the city have revisions to the planning code, and when is the next change expected to occur?
What it amounts to is when we have time.
If
Well,
you're,
that's,
in an ideal situation, you do at least one a year. And a lot of departments will try to do 2 a year. But it's all a matter of what we're capable and able to do And we haven't been able to come close the past 3 or 4 years and even touching something other than processing applications.
It's been just us.
But for a very, very short time period, the next month and a half, we have extra employees right now, so that's why we're getting this done. That will change, though.
In the meantime, over a period of years, we've kept a little catalog of all the changes we made, or wanted to make, and finally we had a chance to make
But,
them.
I don't know if you've noticed, but, in general, most of the changes that we've made are kind of administrative improvements and stuff. I mean, there was like
Make things move
the
slow, faster.
townhome thing, the ADU, those are some fairly significant topic things, but there are some other code changes that we need to make to our code that are actually dictated by state statute now. And we didn't try to tackle them now because they're more involved and they're going to be potentially controversial. And we wanted a package that was mostly non-controversial, with a few, but in general. So that's what we were trying to work on, is get as many nitpicky things done as we could. And then the next package will probably have more controversial topics in it.
Yeah, I think you planned that to start occurring after you have left.
You got it.
That's why they pay me the big bucks, and I'm compensated royally with a little 8 ounces of water. I'm not thirsty tonight. I don't know if we adjourn, or
Are we done?
I think we're done.
I think we're done.
When's the next, do we have an application next time?
Currently, we actually do not have an application for the May 3rd.
No, June 10th.
So,
Do you know of a different one?
So theoretically, it would be
Got this.
the 13th of May, correct?
yes, that's the next regularly scheduled
Yes,
meeting.
sounds right.
And right now, we do not have an application that we believe would be ready for that meeting.
Okay.
Fortunately, we had a little pause as far as,
That's when you're leaving.
But I do have a question. So we would not meet typically on the 27th, which is
Right.
Right.
Monday, Memorial Day weekend. I think that Laney should be here, but the rest of us have that day off. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. Or maybe the day after that holiday.
Yeah.
She could come and. Now, if we get,
I should have
if
two.
we get an application in that we think's, time is money with the developer, we might call a special meeting for a non-Monday, the last week of May, if something like that should come up here in the next
Just
week
give
or
us as
two.
much notice as you can.
But that's what it'd have to be, because we can't guarantee we can get a quorum on non-regularly scheduled meetings. But if we got some big developer that was in a rush, we might do that, since if we don't meet on the 13th. Otherwise, we actually had an application that was scheduled for the 13th, but the applicant said, I won't be out, I'll be out of town, would you please put it on the June 10th meeting? And that's when we're hoping to bring this back as a public hearing.
Well, I would like to thank the member of the audience for showing up.
Persevering.
Anything else for the good of the order?
Yes, we did have that on the 25th of February, the
Okay.
first meeting. Do you remember when we had to bring you 2 extra pages?
Okay.
It was.
It's on those pages,
Yeah, it's on
so I
those
can't find it
pages.
just going
That's
back through my
right.
PDFs. All right,
But I found it because I
Good
know
for you.
this
All right.
chapter's longer.
I stand corrected. Gladly.
That's all I wanted to do.
Okay, we're adjourned.